And just like that, we're back with another episode that kept us moving and fast. I feel like this week it was a completely different show than the past couple of episodes, which I don't know if it was my favorite style, but I'm glad that it had a lot of emotional depth woven in. If we haven't met yet, my name is Vanessa Tejesus Guzman. I'm a licensed therapist, a mom coach, podcast host, and a big believer that TV can be more than just entertainment. Here on Tea and Takeaways, we watch our favorite shows through a therapist lens, breaking down the important real life themes behind the drama. Think relationships, parenting, identity, and emotional growth, all woven in a way that's light, relatable, and fun. So if you've ever found yourself yelling at the screen or wondering, well, am I the only one who saw that? Then you're in the right place. Let's start from the lightest to the heaviest moments in this episode and see what we can learn along the way. And we're starting off with Seema. Now, before we even talk about Seema, I've got to tell you how surprised I am to see Ryan Serhant back. And yes, in true Ryan fashion, from what we've seen on his own show, Owning Manhattan, because he is a real life person, he's all about confident charisma and definitely all about the business. And the fact that he's pushing Seema out of her own office by the end of next week, I mean, total power move, or to quote him, total dick move. And that's what we expect from him. And I get it. Business is a big deal and they make millions of dollars, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't sting. And I can't help but feel sorry or bad for Seema because we're so used to seeing her confident and really being a boss babe. And it's got to be hard. It's got to be hard to walk past your name on the wall only to be told that it's no longer your space. And there's something symbolic about that as well, because you can build something and pour your heart into it, even if it feels like partially yours, only to be reminded that it never was. And that's always a risk whenever you work for somebody else, that you can give your heart and soul into it. But if it doesn't fully belong to you, you just never know what's going to happen. And I'll admit, last week I jumped the gun and I said that the firm was kind of supposed to be hers. But then I wondered this week, well, really, was it? Because I wonder, maybe her boss did think that Ryan was the better fit to be the leader, the number one position. But that also makes the whole thing a lot complicated as well. We often talk about women empowering other women, about mentorship, about earning our seat at the table. But then that makes me wonder and ask you, well, what happens when our seat at the table is no longer there, or when we realize that our seat at the table actually was never really promised? And what happens when your years of loyalty and dedication still aren't enough? And Seema trusted her boss, not professionally, but personally. And that's it right there, because that's a really fine line to walk. When those relationships blur, then the fallout, they cut and hurt even deeper, because she still has to figure out not just where to work, but how to rebuild trust in herself. And the process of starting over is big. So, in terms of Seema, my therapist takeaways are that when we feel blindsided, especially by someone who we trusted, in this case, Seema's boss, it can shake our sense of stability and our sense of self worth. And clarity often comes after the shakeup. So, when you're going through it, it is a very messy middle. And I guess what we have to put faith in is that sometimes rejection can actually be redirection into or onto a better path, but it takes a little while to get there. For everyone who's ever been let down by a mentor, a friend, or anybody in your workplace, it's okay to feel that betrayal, but remember to not let the moment define you. Just let it reinvent or refine you until you go into your next project. And speaking of redefining yourself, we're moving on to Lisa. And okay, friends, I think I have a little bit of a girl crush because Lisa's lifestyle, between the office, the outfits, the bathroom finishes, specifically in this episode, she's a whole vibe. So, beyond the aesthetics, though, the episode gave us a lot more to Lisa this week. And as she continues to search for this new editor, we see her navigating something that many professionals face, but rarely ever name. And that is the concept of name bias. How she thought she was going to interview a woman named Marion and not a man. And yes, while it is illegal, and they poked fun at that, it is illegal to make a hiring decision based on gender, race, age, or appearance. Let's be honest. These things do still creep into our unconscious reactions, even among the most progressive ones of us, because it's sometimes an implicit bias that we may not even realize. It was also interesting the moment when Marion walked through the door. He's poised, experienced, confident, not to mention good looking. Lisa's eyes widened, but not a word was said about his looks. And I almost expected a comment, but that didn't come. And I think maybe they'll circle back to that in a future episode. But it did leave me thinking how we are so quick to make decisions before the conversation even begins. And then the whole sleep talking thing. It made me laugh because snoring already tests my patience, but random yelling, hey, in the middle of the night, that may be where I draw the line. And Herbert was definitely there as well. So I wanted you to look at this through a clinical lens with me and notice how our anxious feelings can come up in different ways. Some of us work out more, some of us eat more, some of us get a little bit more tense around the house. But for Lisa, it came out through the sleep talking because she was so stressed out in picking this editor. And when Herbert says he's going to continue sleeping in the guest room to get a good night's rest, Lisa calls that concept sleep divorce. And it may sound dramatic at first, but it's becoming increasingly common. And yet there's still a lot of stigma around it. Because for some, sleeping apart can trigger these fears of safety in the middle of the night, let's say, just in terms of physical distance. But emotional distance then brings up a lot of insecurities because some folks may worry, well, what does that say about our relationship? Or what will people think if they find out about it? Especially in cultures where sharing a bed is seen as a sign of healthy marriage, including the American culture. The truth is that rest is personal, and some of us cannot function if we get a good night's sleep. So, a well rested couple and a power couple in this case may mean a much happier couple. But oftentimes we're willing to put that aside and just really put emphasis on what does this say about our relationship when does it really ever say anything. So I say this while knowing that I personally don't like the idea of sleeping in separate beds. However, there really is no one size fits all in a healthy relationship, especially when it comes to rest, to routines, to boundaries. You got to do what works for you. And what does matter is healthy communication, mutual respect, and being flexible. And if sleeping separately helps both partners feel more grounded and less resentful, it's not a bad thing. It's just an adjustment. In our relationships, the best solutions are often the ones that serve us peace and not anyone else's expectations. But that's not quite where Lisa is right now. The person who does look a little bit more at peace this episode is Miranda. That meme, though, until that meme, she was doing all right. And then it was just so funny. Welcome to the internet age where we've all become one screenshot away from being someone else's punchline. And honestly, it was kind of refreshing to see Miranda smiling for a change. And this episode really gave us a version of her that wasn't spiraling, that wasn't overthinking, and that wasn't shutting down emotionally. And I think that that's a big deal because that's where we've seen Miranda in the last three episodes. And yes, she did still have assumed thoughts about her BBC reporter friend Joy, but it seems like she was just less stiff. She was showing up less stiff around her. And by the way, talking about joy, can we talk about how hard it must be to have that kind of pressure in a name? Because when we aren't feeling joyful and our name is Joy, I don't know, that thought just made me laugh. But the conversation between them was definitely a great reminder that we often get in our own way. And Miranda in this episode assumed that Joy wasn't into her because of the meme. And then she spiraled, right? She was thinking about, well, how do I get out of here? How do I do this gracefully? But finally, when Joy actually spoke and let her know that she was just becoming more introverted because she was into her, we saw that her hesitation wasn't disinterest, it was just hesitation and nothing more. So think about how many times we do this to ourselves. We ruin moments not because of what was said, but because of what we assume. When we fill in the blanks based on our fear, rejection, our past experiences, we can really mess things up for ourselves and we build a narrative that doesn't even have any truth to it. One honest conversation can clear the fog, but we have to be brave enough in order to have that honest conversation. So if something is unclear, ask, don't assume. We always hear what happens when we assume. And if you're anxious about what you might hear, that's okay too. But just remember that clarity is always kinder than silence. And that's something that we have to learn to seek for ourselves. Now, a space where we got a lot of clear conversation and a lot of honesty was between Charlotte and Harry. And I gotta say, before even getting into that, I appreciate how much the show continues to reflect diversity of New York City and not just ethnic diversity, but also in different walks of life. And as someone who didn't grow up seeing herself on screen as a tan skinned, educated, bilingual Latina, let me tell you, it matters. So, with that being said, of course, it is still a show, it is still Hollywood. And when Diego casually mentions that he is poly, and the reaction is basically, oh, okay. I was just cracking up and thinking, not in my family would that be okay. And not because they aren't open, but just hearing something brand new like that, not understanding what it is, and then being told and being like, okay, and moving on to the next, I just don't think is a very honest and real reaction of many families yet. And then Rock participating in the community forum was such a sweet touch, though it did remind me of like the ring notifications that I get on my phone. You want to be informed and you want to be helpful, but sometimes it's just a little bit too much and it does become annoying. Still, I love seeing Rock really step into these small moments and being kind of like the community advocate for everybody and really stepping into a sense of agency, which is really nice to see. And in case you didn't know, the actor who plays Rock is actually one of my former students. So it's really awesome to see her on screen and how proud I am of her really shining on screen and off. She really is as kind and thoughtful in real life as she appears on the show. And then there was Harry's dad. That storyline was so hilarious and relatable, but yet it's something that we don't talk about enough. When he was dropping his wisdom bomb, by the way, when he said, she wants, you have, be nice. It sounds so simple, right? And especially in our worlds that we live in today, where so many interactions just feel transactional or defensive. I just thought, imagine if all of us lived by that, if we shared more, if we gave more, and if we were just kinder with one another, it would really make a huge impact on the feeling that we all feel right now. But anyway, going back to Harry, Harry's moment of vulnerability of aging, it really struck me, it really stood out because so often we associate those feelings of aging, of body image, of vanity, or even of anxiety around aging to women. And that's never really shown on how it impacts men. And hearing him just name it so plainly with a little bit of shame, but it was refreshing to see it being spoken about it with such realness. And it reminds us that men also struggle with change and mortality and the quiet grief of no longer feeling young or no longer feeling like yourself. And I hope that we can all be in relationships with people who love us so much, like Charlotte is with Harry, because it was really nice to see how Charlotte assured him that one day we're all going to go through, losing these physical aspects of ourselves, but then also of our relationships, and that we still have the love that we feel with that other person if it's there to begin with. So, in terms of my clinical takeaway, aging isn't just about wrinkles or gray hair. It's also about identity. And for so many people, especially for those who have a strong association to being the strong ones, the providers, the caretakers, aging can feel like losing yourself or losing relevance in the world, especially when it impacts the bedroom. So, whether you're feeling that shift in your body, or let's say your career or your role in your family, know that you're still valuable, that you're still needed, and that you're still a whole person. And a little bit of kindness toward others and towards ourselves goes a long way in making peace with the different seasons of life that we're in. Then, talking about being in a different season and not expecting it, we're going to move on to Carrie. Before we get into the deep stuff, the one liners that we heard in the show: chef's kiss, sister wives dress shop, summer eve's dress, little house on the Carrie, her trying to be country chic while tiptoeing around chickens and dodging free weights and riding around an ATV in these insane 6-inch heels, which you've seen, by the way, in prior episodes of Sex in the City. You can't make this stuff up. And it's definitely classic Carrie. But beyond the laughs and beyond the silly things that definitely brought smiles to our faces, what stood out to me the most, the second thing that stood out to me the most, was her kindness. And that's something that we've consistently seen in the past few episodes. I mean, in the whole series, but definitely in the past few episodes, how she's generous with her words, with her space, with her heart, lending Miranda her home. She's so thoughtful and really not pushing Aidan, even though she has like all of these thoughts in her head, not pushing Aidan about the whole Adderall situation. It's a lot of great things. So it's really nice to see that. And I just wanted to call that out before we get onto the deep stuff. So here we go. Carrie trying to connect with Aiden's sons has to be a challenge for anybody who tries to step into a family and with anybody with kids and into a blended family at that. And what was really nice to see was that you could tell that she meant it, right? She wasn't trying to replace anyone or to be performative. She genuinely wanted to get to know his boys. And that kind of effort isn't always acknowledged, but it really does matter, but it doesn't always change situations. And we're going to talk about the situation when we talk about Aidan, but jumping to what happened after the situation with the family, the conversation that Carrie was able to have with Aidan, so mature, so human, so real. And Carrie admits and even says out loud that while she was playing the waiting game, just like so many of us do when we're trying to prove that we're okay, or when we're trying to prove that something is okay for us when really it's not, it was a big deal. And she finally says out loud what we've all been thinking in the last 4 episodes. And that is that at first she didn't believe that Eden needed to be away from her, right? She was trying to give him the space, but it was not genuine because we saw how she was still thinking about him all the time and really trying to pull him back in. But seeing the family dynamics play out, she recognized that he had to be there for his sons, especially for Wyatt. And Wyatt is really his priority. How he's going about it, we'll get to it, but it is his priority. And when she hands him the key, which I still have some feelings about that, but still, that was what was in her heart. And when she hands him the key and says, use it when you can, when you need to, but not out of guilt, you can almost feel how much that line cost her because he had mentioned something about guilt also. And she didn't want him to use the key or him to even go visit her out of that same place. The therapist takeaway here is that sometimes love is letting go of that somebody or of that situation, and not just to get out of the drama, but really coming from a place from understanding. It's realizing that they're hard doesn't mean that she loves him any less, because clearly you see a lot of love there, but it does mean that her heart is being pulled in one direction while his is in a completely different planet, it seems like. And Carrie really showed us how much emotional maturity it takes to speak like that, to speak the truth and to give space when that isn't what her heart wants, but she knows that's what he needs. It isn't easy, it isn't glamorous, but that is real love. And that's the kind of room and space for both people to breathe. And I just love that she's seeing it from both perspectives, which for a while, Aiden was only seeing it from his perspective. So moving on to Aiden, he was really trying, and I think that it was refreshing to see that he really was trying to be there for her. But I think now we can all agree that Aiden most definitely needs to be in Virginia with his family. From a kid therapist perspective, what stood out to me the most was, especially at the beginning and the middle, was how present Aiden was with his kids. The moment he says, "We've got to get Wyatt out of his own head," you can tell that he gets it. He's not just throwing labels around, but he is really trying to understand his son's inner world. And that doesn't mean that he does it well, but the understanding is there. And that's definitely appreciated because sometimes as parents, we just go on to the next, and it's really hard for us to keep that in perspective. But we've also got to be real about it. And here's where I think that Aiden was a little maybe too protective of his son. I don't know if you can be too protective of your kids, but I empathize with Carrie because with the VR accident, when Carrie gets accidentally hit, I mean, it was funny to see it, but it wasn't just funny chaos because, yes, everybody was overstimulated, but this boy obviously has poor boundaries. And whether it was an accident, I really don't think it was. There's just a lot of emotions there. And there's the scene when the whole blended family is there, right? When the ex-wife's new partner is there, Carrie, the kids all in one room playing games, which from the first glance, a blended family playing games with one another from the outside, it looks beautiful, but wow. The dynamics were heavy, and you could feel the tension beneath the surface as things really started to heat up. The moment we realized that Carrie realized that Aiden was not a fan of Wyatt being on Adderall and she was the one who brought it, we see how right away she rushes to him. She tries to apologize, albeit, when you're putting a lighter on the candles to sing happy birthday, not the best timing. So, but we see Carrie putting Aiden in first place, but Aiden again is not putting Carrie in first place. And again, should he when he has so many other things happening? And not just other things, when he's really putting his boys in first place, maybe coddling a little bit too much, but still, he's taking care of his responsibilities as a dad. And anybody who thinks that Aiden should put Carrie in first place, maybe it doesn't have kids or isn't seeing it from the light of always putting kids first and their well being first. And that's what I truly believe that Aiden is trying to do. But it sucks for Carrie. It sucks for Carrie because she is constantly throughout the episode getting shut down in nice ways. And this was not the nicest of ways. And when we see that outburst, when Wyatt melts down and he retreats to his switch and he gets into the it's all about me and nobody cares about me. I mean, we get that having the diagnosis of ADHD. I definitely get that because that's lack of executive functioning skills, meaning that yes, he's impulsive. He's going to say things before he thinks about them. He's just taking care of like himself at that moment. He's not really thinking about, being empathetic or thinking about how anybody else feels. However, the behavior there really sticks out to me because when he yells, "They're here and they're not my family," that hit hard. And it does speak to how kids internalize change and how they process loyalty, belonging, disruption. But what we're seeing to me is aligned with emotional dysregulation. And yes, that can be a symptom of ADHD, but I just think that there's something more there. There's deep hurt, there's lack of tools. And then I also see how Aiden lost his temper. And I think any parent would, but I also want to point out how that is learned behavior from Wyatt. So if he's seeing Aiden lose it, then he's also going to burst out. And he went from 0 to 100 to saying what he said, fine, pass, but then going around and breaking the window. That was a lot. That was a lot to see. And if we put ourselves in this make pretend situation, it would be a lot to experience as well. So I wonder if some of Wyatt's responses are a reflection of the things that he sees around him. Regardless, though, parenting a neurodivergent or an emotionally reactive kid is not for the faint of heart. It is a lot and it takes like your soul out of you, it feels like. And even when you know what's going on, it's still overwhelming. And Aiden shows us that, yes, he's putting in effort, but that it's also taking an emotional toll, not only on him, but on their entire family. And Wyatt reminds us that when kids are mad, they're not going to always say, I am mad. It's going to come out in their behavior. However, when he says, You're not my family, what he may like the feelings underneath that, what he may mean is, I don't know where I belong. And that can't be fixed by Adderall, right? You can't just pop a pill and think that it's going to do some magic. It's really healed through consistency, safe connection, and through therapy. So I know that some folks are talking about like just the concept of like, why doesn't Aiden just want him on pills? But again, in the therapist perspective, the pills may help, but it's just not enough, and Wyatt needs a lot more. Moving on, Kara leaves. At the end of the episode, we see her on the plane headed back to the city, and it feels like she's just no longer hoping, but she knows. She knows what Aiden's reality really looks like. And she tried, she gave it her full effort, but I think that we saw a version of Carrie that was thoughtful, that was present and open to building something new and really, really wanted it. But when reality hit and a life was knocking, and between the kids, the chaos, the broken windows, it really forces us all to reassess, what is it that we're actually signing up for? And is this what I want out of it? And when she tries to go and purchase that table that he initially gave a thumbs down to, the website then shows that the table has already been sold. And I wonder if she thinks that, oh, I missed out on what I wanted. Comparing it to Aiden, also, I missed out on having this relationship with Aiden. But I wonder if she can stretch that thought and reframe it and said, well, maybe the table wasn't for me, and maybe Aiden wasn't for me right now. Maybe the table is like this version of love that she was chasing, and it wasn't, again, meant for her. And maybe it's a reminder that sometimes we think that what we want isn't really aligned with what we need. So, in terms of the takeaway here, life has a funny way of like nudging us towards clarity, even when it stings a little and even when it hurts a lot. And just like Carrie, many of us have to sit with the uncomfortable feelings and the uncomfortable truth that timing, that fit, and that reality really matters, especially when love is involved. Relationships, just like furniture and the table, might look beautiful in theory, but they still need to fit into your actual life. And sometimes they just don't. So, with that being said, I wonder, what are your thoughts that you're left with about Carrie and Aiden? I'm still sitting here thinking, are you holding on to something because it's comfortable or because it's right? And have you ever paused your own life waiting for someone else to figure theirs out? In the past few episodes, I haven't been shy about how I felt about their relationship, but regardless of that, I never doubted their love. Their love was there. It's just, again, not the right fit or timing for now on either of their parts, because it just never felt balanced. And not because, again, that love wasn't there, but because of the logistics, the lifestyle, the sacrifice that seemed to lean more on Carrie than on Aiden, even though obviously Aiden was dealing with some really heavy things. But now that we all see the full picture, that we see what Aiden is definitely carrying, it makes sense. It makes sense why he was holding on so tightly to his boys and why he hasn't been fully available to give himself to Carrie. And that's not selfishness, that's just life. With that being said, though, I still don't think that Carrie should wait around and hold her breath, hoping for a version of love that only exists in the gaps between like school drop offs and emotional outbursts. Like, Aiden needs to do his own thing, but Carrie also needs to move on. I do believe that maybe in the future, they'll have a chance at love someday. But in the meantime, he deserves to keep living. And so do we. So, with that all being said, thank you for joining me on this episode of Tea and Takeaways. Let me know in the comments, are you team Carrie and Aiden forever, or are you team finally Carrie deserves something new and just to have fun? Subscribe, share, and come back next week because we all need a little reflection with our entertainment. And just like that, I'll see you soon.